Fill her up.
You're listening to the Gas Digital Network.
Hey guys, before we start today's show, I just want to ask you to quickly go over to gasdigitalnetwork.com/survey and fill out a quick survey for us. We're trying to get more promo codes and advertisers for products that you guys are going to like, stuff like beer, music gear, vacation packages, and all sorts of other stuff. We need a little bit of data to show advertisers. So anyway, it would be a huge help to me if you could go over to gasdigitalnetwork.com/survey. It's a quick survey and it's going to help us get the stuff that you guys are going to want. One more time, gasdigitalnetwork.com/survey. Okay, let's start the show.
We need to roll back the state. We spy on all of our own citizens. Our prisons are flooded with nonviolent drug offenders. If you want to know who America's next enemy is, look at who we're funding right now. Every single one of these problems are a result of government being way too big.
You're listening to Part of the Problem on the Gas Digital Network. Here's your host, Dave Smith.
Hello, what's up, everybody? Welcome to a brand new episode of Part of the Problem. It is our new Wednesday one-on-one shows, and this is one that I've been looking forward to. I know a lot of people in the Twitter sphere, the Twitterverse, we're excited about. We have joining us in studio today, Professor of Logic and Philosophy at Rutgers University, Ben Burgis. I'm pronouncing that correctly, right? Because I was saying Burgis for a while. I apologize for that. The G is silent, people. Ben Burgis. So thank you very much for coming in.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
I appreciate it. So for people who don't know the backstory of this is very 2019 of us, this entire event, is that you had put out a video that was a part of the Michael Brooks show, right?
Yeah.
I think that's the name of the show, right? Michael Brooks show called The Debunk, and it was debunking the idea that taxation is theft. We then responded to that video. Then people were tweeting at you about it. And then you, which I must say, I admire about you, that right away, your initial first reaction was, all right, well, let's get together and talk about it. And I felt like, well, I got to take you up on that then. And I would say that I admire that. I like that you were coming in, and I saw you were getting some nice tweets today from some of our listeners who were like, hey, you know what? That's really cool. Because in today's day and age, it does seem like a lot of people on both the left and the right don't really want to engage with the other side. So I commend you for that.
All right, yeah, thank you. Thanks for, and by the way, I've got to say, thank you for not being a coward about this, like Stefan Molyneux, who...
oh, come on. Let's not take shots at Steph. Yeah. I like Stefan Molyneux, so I don't want to be on board taking shots at him. I've been on his show several times. I know you have a beef with him. I've seen your pinned tweet was something about him blocking you.
Yeah. Well, but... You know, my publisher, after that whole interaction happened, did offer an invitation to him along the lines of this, and he hasn't responded to that. But I'm glad that you did. Right. So I'm
all right.
Not gonna
well, Stefan,
sitting here talking shit about Stefan Molyneux.
Well, he's a busy guy. He's got a massive following. Sure. However you feel about him, so a lot of people, I'm sure, want to debate Stefan Molyneux.
Sure.
Anyway, so before we even get into our disagreement, let's just maybe a minute or two. Yeah. On some things that I bet we would really agree on.
Yeah.
And I think that maybe, that's good to just kind of establish that before we get into where we disagree, because I know you commented, made me laugh during the intro, that you said you liked everything up until the problem is that the government's too big, but that everything before that. So I don't know that much. Oh, I should mention, you have a forthcoming book that'll be out next month.
That's right.
Which is called Give Them an Argument, Logic for the Left.
That's right.
Right? So, by the way, I pre-ordered it on Amazon, that wonderful socialist company, Amazon. So I did pre-order it. I'm excited to read it, and I recommend people go check it out. Look, whether or not we agree on all of these issues, I think it's important to read people who you disagree with. I know I've benefited a lot from reading, I don't know, Noam Chomsky, from reading, like people who I don't necessarily agree with on everything, but who really break down things well. Anyway, so I recommend that. So here, let me compliment you in a few different ways. Number one, I like the essence of what you're trying to do with this book, which, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the idea is that you're like, look, there is so much, and I think this spans left and right all over. There are so many people who are in this space who are not armed with arguments that are based on logic and rational thought. And your kind of pitch is you ought to arm yourself with some arguments if you're going to jump into this space. It's fun to kind of insult people. We all get caught up in it sometimes. But am I correct in saying that's kind of the essence of the idea? of the book.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That, and I think that, I mean, you're right that it's all over the place, but I also think that, I mean, I will take a hit for my team here. There is a specific left-wing version of this disease,
Right.
where a lot of people on the left, they're responding to various things that I don't think they're wrong to be annoyed by, but I think that they overreact to it, and they say anytime somebody is talking about, you know, like using all this logic speak, logical fallacies and stuff, they just kind of roll their eyes.
Right.
And a lot of times their only modes of pushing back against the people we disagree with are mockery or moral condemnation.
Right.
Now, there are certainly things in the world that deserve moral condemnation, and I'm not anti-mockery.
Right, sure.
But I don't think those could be our only tools because, one, I think you're going to lose a lot of persuadable people. And you're just not going to get things right? The primary purpose of reasoning isn't to defeat your enemies. It's to make sure that you got to the right conclusion.
And could maybe convince your enemies or convince some people listening to your conversation with your enemies,
convince those who could be convinced. And also, frankly, that like when those are our only tools, mockery or moral condemnation, then inevitably when debates arise within the left, those are what we turn on each other. And that gets like really bad and really alienating. And like, that's why, you know, that's why like a lot of like Twitter is the way that it is. And it's, I think most normal people want nothing to do with it. And that's a healthy instinct.
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that. And I appreciate you acknowledging that there is not, again, I see it on the right as well, but there is something specific to a left-wing space where moral condemnation has been substituted for arguments almost exclusively, you know, in a certain space, not that it's permeates the left, but there's a lot of it. Let's just say.
Yeah, you know, Noam Chomsky or like, you know, Current Affairs magazine will give you good arguments, but there is a lot of space to the left where there's almost this idea that like if you engage with like arguments that you're like already like morally seeding something, that, you know, that it's like, oh, you know, like you're even arguing with these terrible people. That means that you're like not correctly acknowledging their terribleness or something like that. And that all that is toxic, and it's also profoundly counterproductive.
Okay. Yeah, well, I completely agree with you on that. So are you, I mean, I think you know, but everyone listening to my show knows that I'm like an anarcho-capitalist libertarian in the Rothbardian tradition. You know, that's how I best describe myself. What do you consider yourself, a progressive or a socialist, or like how would you define your political ideology?
Yeah. So I'm a member of the Democratic Socialists of America, DSA. So I think that, and I expect this is probably stuff we're going to get more into as we talk more, but, you know, I think that there are different things that a socialist society could look like. And I'm not, you know, I wouldn't say that I have all the answers or I have a detailed roadmap. But I think that there are some things that are probably best run, as public, utilities entirely outside of the marketplace, that meet basic human needs. And to the extent that we do still need a market, I would prefer that to be organized in decentralized workers' cooperatives rather than top-down hierarchical corporations.
Okay. All right. Interesting. Okay. So your book isn't out yet, so I didn't have a chance to read the book before today's podcast. I did. Right. I watched a few videos that I found of you on YouTube, but so I haven't actually heard you talk about this.
Sure.
But I would venture to guess that we would have large areas of agreement in terms of foreign policy, issues of war and peace. I would imagine that you're a pretty anti-war guy, and that you say would be against the numerous wars that America is conducting today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I know that I've heard you before. In fact, actually, that is something that I do. I haven't seen that much of your content. I listened to the episode you did about me. Mm-hmm. I watched most of your debate with Sam Cedar. I didn't get all the way through that, and I watched.
Neither did I.
Well, in any case, you know, and I watched part of one other video that you did on immigration, I think. So, okay. But from what I've seen of you, one thing that I do appreciate about you that is different from some other libertarians that I see is that even though you do, of course, have all the hardcore libertarian economic positions that I disagree with, mm-hmm. It seems to me that a lot of libertarians, like, that's really where their passion is. You know, they're like, oh, yeah, sure, we should, like, legalize drugs and war is bad or whatever. But, like, let's go back to the taxes, right? You know, like, that's what we should really be talking about. Is the top marginal tax rate, whereas I think you do have a lot, appropriately, you do have a lot of moral passion about things like the the drug war and the drone war in India and Pakistan, and U.S. invasions and occupations of other countries, I think there are massive areas of agreement about all of that. You talk a lot about the prison system, which of course, even if we have disagreements about which sorts of things should be, against the law and hence imprisonable, I think we certainly agree that the version of the prison system that exists right now is abhorrent. That a lot of ways, that it involves forced labor, that there's this sort of like looking the other way at this, massive levels of rape, and abuse of inmates.
Which weirdly never, just never comes up. I was thinking, I remember I said, I was a contributor at the time on this show on Headline News, where I'd always be arguing with other people who were supporting wars and stuff. But I remember when the Me Too movement first started, I said, maybe at some point we could get to the epidemic of prison rape.
Right.
Like, does anyone care about that? I mean, I understand that people have been convicted of crimes. Sometimes it's like, distributing a plant. Sometimes it's really bad crimes.
Sure.
But even in a really bad crime, like, does even somebody who committed armed robbery, is it just okay that they live in like these like rape, dungeons or whatever?
Yeah, no, I would go so far as to say that Charles Manson has a right not to be raped. That should be the minimum for anybody.
I agree with you. On that. And it seems to me, and I've been critical of other libertarians for the same reason that you acknowledge that it's really like if you're going to say taxation is theft, which we're going to get into this in a second, but if that's your position that taxation is theft, and it is mine. But okay, well then what is war? I mean, other than mass murder. I mean, if me and you are together on we should end the genocide in Yemen, but we disagree about taxes, I still consider you more of an ally than someone who completely agrees with me on taxes, but is like, there's a genocide in Yemen, there's a genocide in Yemen, And to me, the war on drugs, I mean, it's akin to slavery. It is quite literally enslaving people for the crime of possessing, distributing a plant. To me, that is a moral outrage that I would assume if we don't all nuke each other, in 100 years we will look back at this and be like, wow. That, the same way we look back on slavery or something like that, we would say, I cannot believe this was just accepted by society.
No question. I would actually also add that since you mentioned, getting a lot of things out of reading books by Noam Chomsky, people like that, one libertarian, I don't think as hardcore a libertarian as you. I don't think he's an ANCAP, but certainly a libertarian, somebody on who has your general views about redistribution, all that stuff. Who's really good about this topic? I read all the time. Is Radley Balco, a big fan of his book Rise of the Warrior Cop, which I think is essential reading if you want to understand the way that we've just like completely lost our minds as a society when it comes to like use of SWAT teams, which are supposed to only be there for like emergencies that like the normal police aren't good enough for all sorts of petty crimes, most of them having to do with drugs, oftentimes based on like a sliver of like a whisper from an informant that, there's no serious evidence behind. Yeah. But like,
I remember the whole thing with swatting will like come up in the news, and the coverage, like the extent of it will be like, how awful is it that this kid swatted some other kid? And you're like, this kid's now looking at jail time because he's swatted. If people don't know, swatting is when you tip off a SWAT team or you tip off the cops and you get someone else SWAT rated for bullshit. And you're like, okay, fine. Yeah, that is bad. That I think should be a crime. I agree. Yeah. But can we talk about the fact that you can just this easily get a SWAT team to go break down someone's door? I mean, Jesus Christ, shouldn't there be a little bit more of a like...
That's the much more insane part, that the threshold of evidence is enough that like they'll just take any random person's word over the phone. Yeah. Okay, good enough. Send over the SWAT team, and then like they'll kill the family dog. That's like just totally routine in these raids. That's like one of the first things they'll do.
Yeah, poodle barks at you or something, and they just like take them right out. Yeah, it's really quite horrific stuff. All right, so anyway, I know we're here to kind of argue out the points, but I did think it's worthwhile to point out that there are some issues which personally to me are like the most important issues that I think we have a lot of common ground in. All right, let's take a quick second and thank our sponsor for today's show, which is Talkspace. We all need someone to talk to, a person who can support us through tough patches and even the everyday ups and downs of life. That's where Talkspace comes in. Talkspace is therapy for how we live today. It's mobile, it's available when you need it, and it's affordable. Life can be stressful between work and family and everything in between. It's not always easy to find someone to talk to about yourself. Talkspace is online therapy. It makes taking care of your mental health more affordable and convenient than ever before. Simply provide your preferences for therapy, and Talkspace will match you with one of their 4,000 therapists the very same day. Send your therapist unlimited text, audio, pictures, or video messaging from anywhere at any time. No matter what you're going through, you're not alone. Join the more than 1 million people who feel happier with Talkspace. If you go to Talkspace right now, they're going to give you a great deal at Talkspace.com. If you make sure you use my promo code PROBLEM, you're going to get $45 off your first month, and of course also show support for the show that you love. So go to Talkspace.com, use the promo code PROBLEM, get $45 off, start helping your mental health. Everybody wins. All right, let's get back into the show.
Yeah.
So let's get into the topic
Absolutely.
at hand. That was the video that you made that I responded to. You made a video debunking taxation as theft. I made a video attempting to debunk you. Now you get to come back and debunk my debunk, and then if we have time, I can debunk you. I said this is very 2019, what we're doing right now. But so let me ask you.
Yeah.
The idea that of taxation being theft, which is something that I believe.
Yeah.
One of the things you said in the video right at the beginning was that you said that rests on a logical fallacy. The idea of taxation being theft.
Okay.
Could you explain that to me?
Okay, good. So this is going to sound a little nitpicky, but I want to be clear that it's not that the idea that the claim that taxation is theft rests on a logical fallacy. I think it's wrong, right? But I don't think making the assertion involves committing any sort of logical fallacy. I think it just involves having a moral theory I disagree with, right? But what I do think is that objecting to taxation on the grounds that it's theft commits a logical fallacy. So in other words, if you say, and I'm actually very curious about your take on this, because you got in the video, there was part of it that I'm not sure I totally understood, in your debunk of the debunk, and where you said, well, the argument is not taxation is wrong because it's theft. The argument is taxation is theft. And I'm kind of missing something there, because an argument by definition is a collection of statements where some of them are the premises and one of them is the conclusion, right? So if what I'm objecting to, and what I think libertarians say a lot, is if like you ask, hey, you think taxation is wrong, why is that? And you say, well, it's because it's theft, right? And if you don't have a because in there somewhere, there's no argument. You're just making an assertion, right? You know, an argument is, I believe this because of this other thing.
Okay, I'll get to that in a second. You're right. The statement alone, taxation is theft, is an assertion. It's not an argument. Right. There is a fairly obvious argument that follows from that assertion that you could, and I'll be happy to kind of break that down. But I just want to make sure I'm understanding you correctly. So it's not, saying taxation is theft is an assertion you disagree with, but it's not a logical fallacy.
That's right. Yeah.
But saying taxation is theft and therefore it's wrong,
yes,
is a logical fallacy.
Okay, and here's why I think it commits a logical fallacy, because I agree it's not obvious on its face. You think, okay, well, what's wrong with that, right? We all agree that theft is wrong.
Right. I
say that it goes in this category of things that we all agree are wrong, so it's wrong, right? That follows. What's bad about that? Well, of course, it does follow, but I think that it's circular. So the reason that I think that it's circular is that what we mean by theft is taking away something that we don't have a moral right to take, right? That seems like what theft is. So if you say it's wrong because it's theft, then you're saying that it's wrong because you don't have a moral right to take it, which I think is a bit like saying it's wrong because it's wrong, right? In other words, I think you're smuggling the conclusion that it's wrong into the premises, right? The reason that people are going to come to different conclusions about this issue is that they're going to disagree. Like, let's say for the sake of simplicity, we have Herman Cain's tax plan, that I think he got from SimCity, 10-10-10.
It was 999.
Oh, sorry, 999. You're right.
You just raised Herman Cain's taxes.
Sorry.
Don't raise my taxes, bro.
Okay, no, that's fair. And he said it 1,000,000 times, and I saw the video that spliced it together with Hitler saying 999. So
that is pretty great.
I should be able to remember 999.
Yes.
That's on me. But if we had that, right?
Yes.
So if you're arguing with Herman Cain, he says that a just fair tax rate is 9%, right? So in other words, that it's right and fair and reasonable that out of your pre-tax, what's listed as your pre-tax income, that 9% of it goes to fund whatever Herman Cain wants it to fund. and 91%, goes into your net income. So if you disagreed, you say, oh, that's wrong, right? I object to that. That's because you believe that you have a right to 100% of your pre-tax income, or at least, you would say 100%, but anybody who thinks it's wrong, right, would say at least more than 91%.
Sure.
So the disagreement between you and Herman Cain is about whether the object, whoever that 9% is being given to, has a right to it morally, or whether you have a right to it morally.
Yes.
That's the issue. And so I think when you say it's wrong because it's theft, right? You're saying, well, it's wrong. You're doing something you shouldn't be doing because you don't have, a right to it. So I think that you're just sort of smuggling the conclusion that it's wrong into the premise that it's theft.
Okay, let me put it like this, an analogy, if you will. Let's say we're in like an apartment building here in New York City, and we're having a conversation, and you have a neighbor who's bugging you or something, who's making too much noise, and you say to me, I'm going to go take care of the problem.
Yes.
And you leave and you go and you kill that guy.
Yes.
And you come back and you said, don't worry, I took care of the problem. And I said to you, taking care of the problem is murder.
Uh-huh.
What saying taxation is theft is saying is, fuck your euphemism, that's murder. That's like in this example. Now, if I said to you, taking care of the problem, quote unquote, this term that you use, is murder, and you said, well, Dave, you've committed a logical fallacy. You're saying that taking care of the problem is wrong because it's murder, and it's murder because it's wrong. This is a circular logic. Don't you see where the point that I'm making? The point is that government uses this euphemism called taxation. The argument is that it's theft. Now, the argument, that's just an assertion to say taxation is theft. The argument is that you are the rightful owner of your money. Somebody is taking your money against your will off the threat of violence. And that would meet the definition of theft, which, yes, has been considered wrong for, I believe we could go back to the ancient Sumerians. Theft has been considered wrong. So, yes, it is a kind of a given that murder is wrong.
The ancient Sumerians certainly had taxation and didn't consider that wrong. So
no, but the idea of theft was certainly considered wrong. No, listen, I agree with you. Taxation also goes all the way back to pretty much the beginning. I mean, not every period, and there's been different forms. But if I were to say this, to me, you can disagree with the assertion, or you can disagree. I think this would be the distinction that you were talking to Stefan Molyneux about validity versus soundness. So you can disagree with the soundness of the argument. But if I were to say taxation is theft, theft is immoral, therefore taxation is immoral, that is, you may not see that as sound, but it certainly is not a logical contradiction.
Yeah, well, this is question-begging arguments.
So that is valid.
Are generally valid, right? So the problem with question-begging arguments isn't that they're not valid, right? Valid just means if the premises are true, so is the conclusion.
Yes,
right?
Fair enough.
So it's generally a feature of question-begging arguments, right? So when I say question-begging arguments, for anybody who's not familiar with the term, that just means circular arguments where the conclusion is smuggled into the premises.
So for just an example of that, if you were to say, I know that my dog weighs 70 pounds because of my scale says it's 70 pounds, and I know my scale's accurate because it accurately measured my dog at 70 pounds. That would be circular logic.
Absolutely.
You're using the same tool to verify the other.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
Just
that would be a nice example of circular logic, begging the question. And of course, arguments like that are generally valid because if I say X is true, therefore X is true, well, if X is true, then it's true. So if the premise is true, the conclusion is true. They're not bad arguments because they're invalid. They're bad arguments because they haven't given anybody who doesn't start out agreeing a new reason to agree with you, right? Which is the purpose of rational persuasion, right? Which is ultimately what we're trying to do when we make arguments. Now, I think that in the case that you gave me, I do think that you probably, if your purpose is to convince the murderer, right, that they just did something wrong, then yeah, I think that you probably have made a circular argument, but it doesn't really matter because the obviousness of the truth of what you're saying is so overwhelming that if they don't already get it, you're not going to convince them.
Right, but in my example, if I was not just talking to that murderer, but talking to a lot of other people who are around this murderer, you might convince some of them. I doubt I'm going to convince any tax collectors at the IRS that taxation is
No,
theft.
well, that's
So
sure.
I think what this
that's
really
presumably not the goal, but just to complete the thought, right?
Okay, sure.
They had that in, I think, a more grounded example, right? Like I'm against the death penalty. I'm sure that's another thing that we agree on, but I do think that saying the death penalty is murder, murder is wrong, therefore the death penalty is wrong. I do think that's circular in exactly the same way, because what murder means is wrong killing, right? That's why we don't talk about murdering in self-defense. That's why we don't talk about murdering, soldiers who are invading my country if I'm justified in, resisting them, right? That we think that murder, that the concept of wrongness is built in to the concept of murder. So I think that if we were in some hellscape where there was actually widespread disagreement about whether it's okay to kill your neighbor for like being annoying and making a lot of noise.
Right.
And you didn't just want to sort of underline how much this behavior horrified you, but you actually wanted to like convince people who didn't already see that it was wrong. I do think that you need to do better than that because you are kind of ultimately saying it's wrong because it's wrong there. You need a better argument. So happily, in that case, there's not a lot of disagreement about that. Right?
We're together on the not murdering your neighbor.
Not
All right.
murdering your neighbor. And by the way,
I'm making some progress here.
By the way, when I say that, this isn't like, that really takes something from me because I had up until this summer the most annoying neighbor in the history of neighbors. They'd be playing loud, shitty music at 3 a.m.
I've had some bad ones, man.
It's not that I wasn't tempted, but I did.
But you still understand that would be wrong.
Think that it's wrong.
So I think what this
that's
argument
not controversial, but whether or not you are morally entitled, and by the way, I know you objected to that phrase, even though that's the phrase that Robert Nozick uses. That's the phrase that your favorite guy, Murray Rothbard, uses in Ethics of Liberty, right? That's like a standard phrase for libertarian philosophers to use, right? Is theory of entitlement, right? Who's entitled to what?
Yeah, no, I don't object to it's not that it's incorrect. What I objected to is I think it's starting to get slippery, which aids your future, the argument that you're making at your next steps. What I think it all comes down to is if you're talking about theft, just as you said in your own example, that if somebody takes a TV from you and then the cops go and take it back, we don't consider that action theft. What it comes down to is who's the rightful owner. I'm fine with saying who's morally entitled to it. To me, those would be synonymous. Yeah. So the question comes down to whether you own your money.
More precise, but yes.
Okay, but the question comes down to whether your money is yours, whether you're morally entitled to your money. Now, if your argument, your paycheck, the money that you make at work, whether or not you're morally entitled to that. Now, if your argument is that you're not morally entitled to that money because somebody else might be more morally entitled to it, in your opinion, why is it? Could you walk down the street and just rob somebody of their money if you were going to give it to somebody who's, in your judgment, morally entitled to it? Okay.
So here's a
you can't take my money.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Check. All right. Okay, this was going to be a heist, but now that you've made it clear that it's wrong, I guess I'm going to have to cancel that plan. So, because I think that what you're getting at is a point that you made in the video, which at a certain point you seem to be attributing to me, which I don't think I really said it, but they had which is this idea that if you disagree with that taxation is theft, you must think that the state should be judged according to a different set of moral standards than everybody else. Because we would all agree that, if I just grabbed your wallet right now, that would be theft, even though I'm taking less money than the government is when they tax you. So why isn't, if there's a difference, it must be that I think that the states, that there are different rules for the state. Now, I actually don't think that it gets down to that, right? I don't think you need to judge the state by different moral standards to make sense of saying that I shouldn't be just taking from you, right, whenever in my judgment, it's right. But redistributive taxation is also is okay. So here's an analogy I find helpful. I don't know what you think about speed limits, because I expect that as a, when you say you're an anarcho-capitalist, you don't think, okay, but like we can make a special exception just for this one thing, right? The state could still do this. But at the same time, since you're a sane person, you presumably don't think that anybody should be allowed, that like anybody should be able to drive at any speed they want without like anybody stopping them, right? Or maybe,
no, I would think that if there was somebody who owned the road, they could set whatever speed limit they wanted to set.
Okay, all right. I think such a system would have a lot more dead bodies than the one we've got. But to focus
in Iraq and Afghanistan and in Yemen, or just here,
a lot more dead bodies due to traffic accidents than we've got. Yeah.
All right, we got a lot as is.
No, we do. Okay. We do have a lot, but I think that allowing road owners to set whatever one.
Okay, but let's just not listen.
But I don't want to get too far off course here, right?
Because whether the system would work, in your opinion, is a different question than what we're talking about.
Sure, absolutely. So let's say we woke up tomorrow in like some sort of Walking Dead scenario where there was like all of the like normal authorities had collapsed, and maybe like the zombies weren't in like the town we were in, but but like whoever was normally supposed to be doing things like traffic enforcement wasn't doing it. Right? In that case, in that situation, and I think it would absolutely be justifiable, for like just like a group of people, some like non-state, group, neighborhood association, Black Panthers, whoever was on it, right, to go out and direct traffic and stop people, who are trying to drive at unsafe speeds. I think that would be a legitimate thing that they could do. In that situation, I think that would be totally justified.
All right, let's take a quick second and thank our sponsor for today's show, which is People's Choice Beef Jerky, LA's original small batch beef jerky. I love this stuff. Me and Rob Bernstein were just eating some of the small batch earlier today before the show, and we all eat it here at Gas Digital. It's really delicious. It's a family business from California that's been making quality jerky for over 85 years. And unlike mass-produced beef jerky, People's Choice Beef Jerky is marinated, sliced, and cooked by hand. That's right, People's Choice Beef Jerky is handmade in small batches, and I'll tell you, as soon as you bite into it, you notice the difference between the mass-produced stuff and the stuff that's made by hand. Anyway, beef jerky is good for you, loaded with protein and key vitamins. It's a high-energy snack. It's easy to eat on the go. You can keep it at your desk. It works. Anyway, go to peopleschoicebeefjerky.com. They have a diverse line of products and flavors, and if you use the promo code POTP20, you're going to get 20% off anything you order. The promo code will only be active for a month, so take advantage of this. So once more, that's People's Choice Beef Jerky, and the promo code is POTP20 for 20% off.
So the fact that, but that said, in the situation where we actually have traffic enforcement, right? I wouldn't support like, you or I just deciding to be vigilantes and like, going out to stop people who were in our personal judgment driving too fast, because I think that people taking it into their own hands like that would lead to chaos and also a lot of avoidable death, right? So I think that. So, in fact, I could totally imagine circumstances under which I would be okay with non-state actors.
Yeah, but I can see, this is the problem with this. I can imagine circumstances under which you could justify just about anything. I mean, if you really want to go down that road, I mean, you could imagine a circumstance but I'm saying I could imagine a circumstance where you would like kill somebody because some Saw type figure had buried a key in them that could unlock 100 other people. So if we want to come up with a Walking Dead scenario, maybe. What I'm saying to you right now is, if you were to walk down the street, threaten to throw someone in a cage if they didn't give you their money, would that be theft? Under current conditions, the same conditions that you're advocating that the government can do this, could you just go do this? Or would that be theft?
I think that it would. I think that what you just described, I think, would be bad, because I think that.
But would it be theft?
I think decisions. Okay, how about this one? How about two farmers are having a property dispute?
Yeah, but why won't you answer my question?
Because my question reveals why your question is stacked, right? So, there are two farmers are having a property dispute, right? Mm-hmm. And one of them, and let's even say the one who's like objectively correct, right? Says, hey, if you keep on letting your cows graze over here, I'm gonna shoot you, or maybe I'm gonna like throw you in like a jail that I've constructed in my basement. Would you think that was okay?
I'm not understanding. So there's cows are grazing on his property?
Well, what he thinks is his property, the other guy thinks that it's his property, right? That's the kind of thing that happens.
Okay, so there's a dispute. There's a property dispute.
This is not some wild hypothetical.
No, I'm following. I'm just trying to follow the situation. So he says it's his property. He says it's his property. The cows are grazing there. He says if your cows keep grazing, I'm going to shoot you or throw you in a cage in my basement.
Yeah.
That would be wrong.
Yeah.
Yes.
Do you agree?
Yes.
Okay. But nevertheless, you are generally okay with like having no trespassing signs that are enforced by, like that's an implicit threat of violence, if anything is. They have that you think you presumably, maybe in your preferred anarcho-capitalist utopia, it wouldn't be enforced by the state because there wouldn't be a state, but somebody would be enforcing property rights.
Okay, so the answer to this, right, and Rothbard addressed this many times in his writing, is that what you have to, and this is just true in general, right? Like whether there's a state or there's not a state. If somebody gets caught shoplifting and you take them outside and put them on their knees and shoot them in the head, no, that is not appropriate.
Okay, that's excessive
what you have
force,
to. But that's what you're talking about.
But if you warn them over and over and over again, and eventually after a sufficient number of warnings, you say, okay, I'm gonna like put you in this cage and keep you there for a while. To teach you a lesson.
No, you wouldn't have a right to do that. Okay. No, I mean, you could use whatever force was necessary to expel them from your property. And like, by the way, no matter what principle you're going to come up with, any principle I have or any principle you have, in the application of those principles, they have to be applied with some degree of reason. So yes, I still, even though I wouldn't want it to be run by the state, you want to have some type of system of courts, judges, some type of system of a fair, I don't know. Quite possibly, maybe not. I really don't know. Listen,
that's a pretty important question. Right?
Yes, it is. But look, here's an example Stefan Molyneux used to use, which I actually like quite a bit, regardless of your feelings of his. But when you're predicting the way things are going to work in the market, it's difficult to say this is exactly how this is going to happen if we have a free society. Different areas are going to try different things. I personally don't know that jail would be necessary. I think that quite possibly excommunication, things like that, might be a more effective system. I don't know. But if you were, this is the Stefan Molyneux example, if you were living in slavery times and someone was like, well, if we don't have slaves, who's going to pick the cotton? And you tried to explain to someone that like metal machines that are run on juice that we find under the ground are going to pick cotton for us, probably no one would have been able to predict that. But you can still operate under first principles and say, no, it's wrong to enslave people. So I'm just saying, I don't know exactly how local property disputes or acts of violence like this would be solved. I'm not seeing the connection to what I was saying before. So why you can't steal money from someone.
So here's the connection. It's probably a really bad system, right? Like to have these decisions adjudicated by like individuals just taking the law into their own hands, right? Because if we all had, jails in our basement and, if in our judgment, people had violated our property rights and, and we'd, you convicted somebody in the court of Dave, that they'd violated your property rights. So you put them in that jail. That would be a terrible system. That would be chaotic.
I agree. That would be a bad system. Yes.
It's much better. Even if it's stateless, that like there has to be something that's like a much more orderly, predictable system than that for doing this. And I would say the same thing for redistribution, right? That they have I think that my just taking your wallet and saying, okay, I'm pretty sure that like in my judgment, in a fair distribution, you would have, $20 less and I would have $20 more. So I'm going to enforce this, right now by grabbing your wallet. I think that having individuals just make those sorts of judgments, I think would probably lead to chaos. And that would be a really bad way to do it. The same way that you enforcing property rights in the way that we just talked about would be a really bad system that would lead to chaos. But that doesn't mean, and this is not some bullshit hypothetical, that's like, okay, it's so distant from reality that you can't take it seriously. Although honestly, I think that you kind of have a problem if you're going to be, say, on the one hand, hey, no thought experiments that are drifting too far away from reality. On the other hand, maybe in a free society, there'll be some unpredictable way of working this out. I think there's a little bit of tension between those two those two positions. But if you have, but I think that even in like a way that is much more immediately imaginable than that, I could totally see, non-state actors being justified in carrying out redistribution. So I'm thinking, for example, like squatters, taking over buildings that are, as many buildings in the city are like owned by Russian oligarchs because it's like a convenient way to like park some money, right? That I would, like squatters taking that over, I would be totally in favor of that. I could imagine some situation where we were transitioning from capitalism to socialism, where you just had like militant trade unions, taking over workplaces. I'd be 100% in favor of that. So it's not that I think that the state, that there's like a different morality for the state and everybody else, right? I think that it's not that like state actors are justified in doing this because, things are moral if the state does it, that are immoral if the state doesn't do it. It's that I think that if everybody is just making their own judgments about this, and whether they're making their own judgments about carrying out my principles about who's entitled to what, based on ideas of justice and fairness, like from John Rawls, or whether they're carrying out your ideas about what just entitlements are based on being able to trace it back to some just act of original acquisition, you haven't violated anybody's property rights in the middle. Either way, I don't think that individuals should be I think that it's better to have a more orderly and predictable way of carrying out these judgments than just individuals taking the law.
Okay, let me respond to some of what you're saying here. So, number one, I don't think there's any issue with me saying that you went to some scenario where we're living in The Walking Dead, and then when you brought up a scenario of a stateless society, I responded to what that scenario might look like. I'm not taking it to some crazy scenario. I'm talking about real life, the life that we live in right now, even in a society something like this. Now, you can say that you don't think the system would work as well with you just taking people's money as opposed to the state taking people's money, but that's not what we're talking about here.
I agree that
we're
that
talking
should
about
be the focus.
morally whether this is theft or not. So if the state can do it, but you can't do it, because in my example, whatever we're talking about, I believe that morality is something that transcends a position that we made up between us. You're cop, you're civilian, you're maybe slave, you're slave master, whatever, you're ruler, you're king. That's just stuff that we made up between us. If morality existed, then it exists. Then it's something that transcends that. In other words, if you were to murder somebody in a lawless, stateless society, it's the same act of evil as it is if you murder someone here. You might end up going to jail for it here. I'm not asking whether you think it would be a good system that would work if you went out and stole people's money. I'm asking if you would think it was theft, if you went out, threatened someone with violence, took their money, and then gave it to someone who you've decided is more morally entitled to it. If you're going with the Rawls example, because, I don't know, you sat behind a veil of ignorance and decided that you would feel better if this guy didn't have this money and he had his. Is that theft? Is it wrong? That's my question. Is it morally wrong? Because to me, it's pretty blatantly obvious. And I think to most people, it's pretty blatantly obvious that if you went and robbed someone on the street and took his money and just decided you were going to spend it the way you see fit, that would be wrong and it would be theft.
Yeah. And I think that it would be a bad thing to do. I don't think it would be bad for the reasons that you think that it's wrong. I think it would be bad for a different reason. So
you don't think it would be morally wrong?
So I think that it's immoral to do things that are likely to have bad results, that aren't going to have, that aren't justified by any sort of plan to like bring things in line with something that's going to have good results. I still think it's morally wrong. It's not morally wrong,
but it's not theft. I'm sorry. I'm trying to understand your point. It's not theft.
If the motivation is that I am, if the motivation is that I think that it would that the distribution that we should have that would reflect what morality requires is. That like that's sincerely my motivation. I think it's stupid. I think it would be morally wrong because you're creating a chaotic state of affairs. People have a right to be able to have like some orderliness and predictability in these things. But no, I don't think that it would be because people are morally entitled to it. And in fact, we could construct a case where you would have to say something exactly similar, which is that if I say, like, if I just as a private citizen, right, I have been reading about this land dispute between Farmer Joe and Farmer Bob. I come to the conclusion, based on my research, that Farmer Joe is right and Farmer Bob is wrong. That conforms with Murray Rothbard's definition of a just acts of original acquisition and, the non-aggression principle. But in terms of not just the law, right, as we have it, but like the correct libertarian theory of more property rights, Farmer Joe is right and Farmer Bob is wrong. So I decide to march up to Farmer Bob, who is currently on this land that really should belong to Farmer Joe, and forcibly expel him from it. Right?
Right.
I've whatever you would regard as a proportional amount of force, for doing it, right? That I know there are a lot of details that need to be nailed down there, but whatever you do, well, I think that now maybe you don't agree, but I think that that's the sort of behavior that there should be rules against in any well-functioning society.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I don't disagree that there should be rules against that.
But you don't think that it would be, you don't think that you're it's not that you're stealing the land from Farmer
You've given
Bob.
me
It's
way
that-
too
it's that
little.
It's that it's
Look.
wrong. It's wrong for a different reason.
Okay,
right?
well,
It's
look,
not
you've given
wrong
me way
because
too-
it's
No.
violating his moral entitlements. It's wrong for a different reason.
No, that's not what I'm saying. You've given me way too little information in this hypothetical, but theoretically, if someone stole your land and you helped that person reclaim their land, then that wouldn't necessarily be immoral. But yeah, there would probably be some type of system of litigation, a court that you would go to, and if they found that you were wrong and it wasn't actually that person's land, you would now be on the hook for committing a crime.
All right, guys, I want to take a quick second and thank you about our awesome sponsor, our longtime sponsor, HeshySocks.com. I love this product, the best pair of socks I've ever owned. Spring is here, summer is around the corner, temperatures are rising, and comfort is king. Whether you're going for a hike, a bike ride, you're going to the gym, playing ball, just stuck in the office, or just hanging out on the couch, make sure your feet are as comfortable as possible. And there is no better way to keep your feet comfortable than with Heshy Socks, which you can grab at HeshySocks.com. The most comfortable kick-ass fashion socks for work or play. I love them. I've told you all about it. If you're wearing dress shoes, nothing is going to make your feet more comfortable than a pair of Heshy socks. You can also wear them with sneakers. They've got a wide, diverse, selection. It's really, really great. Of course, as you know, all Heshy socks are made with high-end Pima cotton, which is extremely breathable in the warm weather, but they are also treated with antimicrobial properties to keep your feet fresh and smelling right. Anyway, it's a really, really great product. If you go to HeshySocks.com and you enter the promo code PROBLEM30, you're going to get 30% off your entire order. This is a great deal and a great product. It comes out to $7 a sock. This is shocking. You will not find this quality at this price anywhere. Stop buying overpriced socks at the malls or some inferior site that sells socks that fall apart after a couple of washes. Go to HeshySocks.com, use the promo code PROBLEM30, get 30% off. A great product at a great price. All right, let's get back into the show.
But anyway, I'm sorry, I just can't let you slide on this point on my hypothetical.
Hold on. I'm still not clear about how you're avoiding the analogy because it's one.
No, I'm not avoiding an analogy, dude. I'm trying to ask you a very simple question. It's not one-to-one.
It's totally
You're
one-to-one.
saying that if you go and rob somebody of their money, it's not theft if your heart was in the right place and you were trying to give it to who was morally entitled to the money in your view. Okay? So is this basically, are you saying theft doesn't exist as long as the person says, I wanted to have a more moral distribution of money in the world and that's why I took it?
I think that I think there are a couple threads that deserve to be separated there because I think you're mashing together a lot of distinct issues to present this in a misleading light.
But it's such an easy question.
Okay.
Whether you can go rob somebody. Is that theft?
Well, yes. If robbing people is theft because robbing and theft are two words for the same thing. So yes, that is theft.
Okay, fine. So if you go by force, take somebody's money on the street, is that theft?
Okay. How about if the person is an IRS agent and they got their money and that you're stealing money that's equivalent in the taxes that you got from them, is your you're robbing them, right? Like just grabbing their wallet by force, taking out, let's say for some stupid reason, they were like carried around this huge roll of money. Right?
And you could tell what was yours that had been taxed?
Well, no, you couldn't tell what was yours, but you could take out, how much you paid in taxes, right? So do you think that like street robbery of IRS agents is not theft?
I think that taxation is theft, and if you can steal back the money that was yours in some way and you know that that's your money, then while I would also say a very bad idea because the state will probably crush you. No, I don't think there's anything moral about that.
So you think if you're taking, how about if you're like going into like let's say you had a massive tax bill, right? And so you just like steal the equivalent back, from like the financial equivalent back from the IRS agent. They have
the agent is almost making it tricky to me because you're saying so there's one agent who's walking around with a bunch of money, but you don't know whether that's your money or somebody else's money or whether that's his money.
Okay. Let's.
I'm just trying to actually follow because I want to give you an answer.
Let's say you've done the calculations, right? You figured out, hey, here is the income that's paid to the average IRS agent. Here's what I paid in taxes. They have here's the proportion of it, right? Like you do the math and you're right? That they have $20 that this particular person would not have, if not for the fact that I, like it's like Jeff Bezos maybe, could like.
The guy who's pushing your book.
Yes,
right.
My good friend Jeff Bezos. It's number one right now in the philosophy criticism section on his website. So
nice.
I feel unusually warm feelings towards this plutocrat. Jeff Bezos, if he correctly reasons that each individual IRS agent has at least $20 that they would not have if not for the fact that he had this massive tax bill, right? Then would Jeff Bezos be justified in like mugging IRS agents if he only took $20?
In the exact same way that if somebody took your watch and you went and took it back from them, I think you're justified to do that. If it is his money that was taken from him, I think you're justified in taking it back.
But that is just, because if you're going to try to appeal to this kind of common sense, like, we all think that like mugging is wrong, right? Mm-hmm. Well, they have, if part of the reason you think mugging is wrong is because you're not entitled to the money, right? That's their money. Then, just like on my view, there are cases where mugging isn't wrong for that reason. It might be wrong for some other reasons, right? But it's not wrong for that reason. On your view, there are going to be muggings that are going to be justified. Or at the very least, they might be bad. They might be wrong for other reasons.
Yeah,
but they're not.
Yes.
They're not going to be wrong because they're violations of property rights.
Well, in my view, it isn't a violation of property rights. Look, the difference between our two views here is that in my scenario, or in the scenario that I agreed to, money was taken from you and you're taking it back. And in the scenario I gave to you, you're just going and taking money from some random person who's never done anything to you on the street. So they are different scenarios. But let me because I think what the core of the issue here is what we're kind of beating around is who rightfully owns it, as I would say, or who is morally entitled to the money that you make. And that's really what it comes down to. Because if you are entitled to the money you make, then I think you would agree with me that taxation is theft. Your argument is that you're not morally entitled to that argument.
Yeah.
Fair enough?
Saying taxation is theft is a different way of saying that you're morally entitled to the money.
So I think where it comes from, where the libertarian philosophy builds itself from, is really relying on the idea of self-ownership. Mm-hmm. I think that's kind of what we need to hammer out next in order to get to this. Would you dispute the idea of self-ownership as a principle?
I would, although I also don't think that it's the core of the disagreement. So let's do that one at a time. So the reason that I would is because I think that when you say I own myself, you're just sort of using that as a kind of metaphorical way of saying that I have a right to bodily autonomy. I should get to control what happens to me. Then fine, I agree. And I know that, this is getting into some deep weeds because a lot of libertarian philosophers would say, that ownership just is getting to make a bunch of decisions about something, or maybe most of the decisions about that thing. I think that's wrong. I think ownership is a much more specific concept. And one of the reasons that I don't like it taking self-ownership literally, at least, is because if I own myself, then I should be able to sell myself, and then we have indentured servitude. And I think that that's, all of these other, like the intuition that you're appealing to earlier. Hey, we all agree that mugging is wrong, right? I think that indentured servitude is much more horrifying than mugging, right? So I think that any moral theory that generates that consequence, right, that's kind of a reductio ad absurdum of the theory. So I don't think that self-ownership, I don't think that we should think of personal autonomy as literally a form of property ownership. But the reason I don't think it's the core of the disagreement, right, is because even if I gave you self-ownership, I think all your work would still be ahead of you, because what the controversy is really about is external property. Now, I know there are some moves that can be made to try to sort of make external property just like an extension of self-ownership. A lot of that stuff, honestly, that's kind of lock-in. If you're mixing your labor with it, that it's yours. Well, actually, one I think is kind of funny because you could also take that in a Marxist direction. Profits are theft. Because I created it by the fruit of my labor. But two,
not if you have an understanding of property rights. No, because it's not your property. So if you make an agreement, if you make a voluntary agreement with an employer and you work for them, the agreement isn't that you own what you use their machinery to make.
But the cheat code in that sentence is the word voluntary. It's not meaningfully voluntary. It's like in your discussion with Sam when you. When he said, and I think you were right to call him on this. I think he was wrong about this part, right? He said, "Oh, hey, social contract. If you don't like taxation, you could just move somewhere else."
I was actually really surprised that Sam said that to me, because that defeated. Yeah. I mean, look, I just a quick aside. I didn't think I did a great job in that conversation with Sam. It also was a little bit of a. Having a discussion like the one we're having right now, when you're on a landline phone, is a much more challenging. I don't think for people who haven't done it realize how much more challenging it is. And I think he did it, he was bringing up a lot of different things and kind of keeping me on defense. But I remember listening back to it and being like, man, I really should have pushed back harder on that, because I was very surprised that he would say, if you don't, it basically, I said to him at one point, I said, so you're making a love it or leave it argument, which would defeat so many of the positions that you have. Like Sam was, I think this was before gay marriage was the law of the land. And I could just as easily say to you, like, oh, you're for gay marriage. Well, fucking beat it, bro. Like, get out of here. Or pretty much any policy you don't like, you could say that for. But anyway, I'm sorry, the point you were making.
Yeah, right. So, and I agree. I agree with most of what Sam said in that discussion, but that was definitely a point that I was kind of like, wait, huh? Right? So I have. So I think that the same reason that's a bad argument, right? That it's voluntary because you could just go somewhere else, was like, well, okay, but like realistically, one, that's a lot easier said than done, right? And two, where else are you going to go, right? Where there's what's the, it's not like there's some Rothbardistan you could move to.
Not yet.
Not yet, right? Maybe your Free State Project. Maybe there's something that that down the line, right? But right now there's not, which is part of why that's a bad argument. And similarly, that realistically, now we could talk about skilled workers who have more negotiating power. We could talk about groups of workers collectively do, but realistically, most people are not in a position to work for themselves. They have that, if there are only so many escape hatches out of the working class that way. Most small businesses fail in like the first 6 months or something crazy like that, right? That's not something everybody could just do, right? Most people realistically don't have an option except to go to work for one of these companies. And sure, if you don't want to work for this particular company, you can go work for some other company. The same way, if you don't like it here, maybe you could move to Canada or something. But they're also going to have taxes in Canada, right? The basic capitalist employment contract is going to be the same no matter where you go. So I think that this pretense of voluntariness, I think that's a very thin conception of what it takes to be meaningfully voluntary and like really have other options there. But I also don't think this is the core of the disagreement. I think it's an important disagreement, right? Because, I mean, we're going to come to different conclusions about whether certain kinds of economic institutions in our society are justified. But even if you totally gave me this right now, right, it would get me no closer on the taxation point, because, you know, you could just be switch from being an ANCAP to being an ANCOM, right? You know, and you'd still have the objection to taxation and redistribution, right? So I think that the core, you know, the more important problem is that it's just not an extension of self-ownership to say, therefore, you have a right to anything that was created either with your labor. And of course, when people are making this argument, they're often doing these little thought experiments. You know, I make a table in the woods, right? You know, that are very unlike how most wealth, you know, comes to most people in real life. That really, it's you know, that you can accept self-ownership and deny that therefore you have ownership claims to these things in the external world. That's a further move.
Okay, but that is the logical line of thought that we're going down. So, or that's the libertarian position, more or less, that there is a connection there. Okay, so let me just, because you're throwing a lot of stuff at me, so I want to just try to respond to as much as I can. So, in terms of arguing that there's a social contract, and you can leave if you don't like it, being the same as an actual contract, I think is completely flawed. And the big difference is that I never agreed to any social contract. I didn't sign on to any social contract. And when I go and work for somebody, I have actually agreed to something and made a voluntary decision. Now, you, I think, are blurring the line between voluntarism and force, which I think is right at the center of where we disagree.
Well, I have a more realistic conception of voluntarism, but yeah.
Okay, I think I have a more realistic conception of it, but okay, so we're even on that. But anyway, I'd say if you're going to say somebody, because they might have limited options, that makes something not voluntary. Like if a woman is like, oh, there's only one man who's interested in marrying me and I really want to get married, and I don't really have the option to marry anyone else, so I marry this guy. It's very different than saying it's rape. It's not rape because you still chose to be with that person.
Is she going to starve to death if she doesn't get married?
No, and nobody. If you're going to say that people don't really go in the woods and make chairs, people aren't really starving to death. No, but the reason
that they're not starving to death in 2019 is because of redistributive social programs.
Well, I disagree.
And unions and the past gains of workers' struggles.
Yeah, well, I completely disagree with that.
Well, I mean, you can disagree with it all you want. That's a historical fact, but okay.
No, it's not. It's an assertion. It is. It's okay. I think the reason that people are not starving in America today is because there's been so much capital investment. There's been so much improvement in technology, in the economy, that we don't live in an economy where people are struggling like that for food. We actually have a big problem with obesity amongst poor people. We don't have a problem with them starving to death. No, except there are places in the world that have problems with starving to death, and it's not because of a lack of state power. Anyway,
no, it's because of a lack of unemployment insurance. I mean, like that's a big difference right there. That you have some sort of income versus no sort of income. Also, of course, people.
If I'm thinking of places in the world where people are starving, I could look at North Korea, where there's a totalitarian state with complete government control. You can look at. I mean, I think actually it's been somewhat exaggerated in Venezuela, but there's certainly some problems with people getting food. That's partly exaggerated because the neocons, who I'm sure we both hate, have a hard-on to go to war there.
Footnote, Venezuela's public sector is like 2% bigger than America's public sector.
Oh, agreed.
It's smaller than the one in France. So I think, which is
I'm not arguing that we live in a free market capitalist system, but we do have better policies probably than Venezuela.
I understand, but there are places with literally bigger governments, right? Like if you compare who works for private companies to who works for the government, then there are lots of places in the world with much bigger governments than Venezuela that are not only doing better than Venezuela, they're doing better than, poor and working class people in the United States are doing.
Okay, fine.
Norway,
that
Sweden,
might be the
Finland.
case. Okay, fair enough. Let me get back to this, because this is at the core of what I want to get back to us talking about.
Yeah.
The idea of self-ownership to me is, first off, just to quickly establish what the libertarian position is on this, is that I think this is so fundamental, and I also think it's kind of obvious that when I talk about ownership, or when libertarians talk about ownership in general, what we mean is the moral right to have exclusive control and make decisions about whatever the property is. And when you talk about self-ownership, in the same sense that I could say my right hand or your right hand, and we all know what we're talking about, even just in common language, we all identify it as mine or yours. I could say, slap myself in the face, and you might say that's really stupid, but no one's saying you just did something wrong or immoral. You didn't violate anybody's rights. If I run out on the street and slap some other guy in the face, we might go, oh, hey, that was a crime that was just committed because your face belongs to you, his face belongs to him. In the exact same sense that if I went home and took my TV and smashed it on the floor, you might say, oh, that was pretty stupid, but no one's really looking to call in a third party to resolve this. Whereas if I went and took someone else's TV and smashed it, it's in the same sense that I can invite someone into my house, and that's fine. But if I tell them they can't come in and they come in, they're breaking in the same way that a woman owns her own body and can choose if she wants to have sex with someone. But if she says no, then that's rape. So the idea, just that's the
Do you
more
think
or
people
less.
should be able to sell themselves into slavery?
I think that it depends on what you're slave. See, here's the thing: if you're saying slavery, the whole thing that made slavery immoral was that it was involuntary. So if you're saying voluntary
So you think
slavery,
indentured servitude was fine?
no, I don't. It's not a matter of saying fine, dude. It's not saying
No,
fine.
but like should be allowed. Should be allowed.
I think here's what I honestly think, okay? And this is getting into the weeds a little bit, but I do think that there is a distinction because it's the first ownership principle of owning yourself. It's a different type of thing than owning somebody else because you're still
Okay, but now there's
No,
ownership.
let me
and
finish.
there's
Hold on.
ownership. I mean,
No, let me finish. It's a little bit different. You own other pieces of property by extension of the original fact that you owned yourself. So yes, theoretically, I think you can agree to work for someone for whatever terms you want to work for them for, but I also think you could you could just break the contract at any point and you might have a lawsuit on your hands. You might owe them some money or something like that, but you could leave theoretically. So I don't think you can put yourself in a position. There's been a lot of libertarians who have written about this. I want to just for the sake of the conversation try to move to the next point. But
this is an important problem with saying that we should understand bodily autonomy as literally a form of property ownership, because look, if I sell you my phone right now, right? And then tomorrow I have regrets about it and I say, Dave, I really want that phone back. And, you decide that, no, you really like it. You're not going to sell it back to me. Then, it's tough, right? I agreed to make that sale, right?
Yes.
And so I no longer have a right to take it back. It's not that it would be okay if I took it back and then maybe I'd owe you something later, right? I just can't take it back. That's real property ownership, right? Whereas I think that self-control, that kind of bodily autonomy is a little bit different and I think you're acknowledging that it's a little bit different by saying that it's in this different category. Now, if you want to call both of them forms of ownership, I think that's just a semantic issue.
Yes, I think they're both forms of ownership that are different.
But I think that my reluctance to call bodily autonomy a form of ownership is that if it's a form of ownership, it's a very different form of ownership than any other form of ownership. And I think that it's a little misleading to use the same term.
Okay, fine, but you would agree that people should pretty much have exclusive control over their body, that they should be able to do with their body what they want. You agree with both of my analogies about hitting yourself in the face versus hitting someone else in the face, a woman choosing whether or not to have sex versus rape, about her choice of whether you can enter or not.
Yeah,
sorry to be crass.
Okay, but I mean that's a good example. So if a woman is in a mountain of debt, has no way to pay it back, is very worried maybe about feeding her kids, and decides to sign some sort of indentured servitude contract, under which there's a sexual component, that somebody, that's anybody, that for the next 10 years this person who I'm signing this contract with, has a right to have sex with me whenever they want, right? If we were literally thinking of your control over your body as a form of ownership, then yeah, that contract should be allowed. And if she has second thoughts later, tough, the same way that we would say that for the cell phone. But I think that we would agree that bodily autonomy means no, at any time, right? You can.
Yes,
you can say no.
I think that it's the difference in property ownership of yourself versus other pieces of property is that you can never truly transfer the ownership of yourself. And that there's something that is fun. I'm not arguing that it's the same to own yourself as it is to own your cell phone, or that people and cell phones are the same. The principle is that you are the one who's the exclusively in control, or ought to be the one who's exclusively in control. And the truth is that it's the only system that allows for us to not inherently have conflict. I mean, if you're going to say, look, just the fact that we're sitting here having this conversation kind of indicates that both of us prefer peace over violence, right? Like, is that a fair, like, logical presupposition of sitting down and having an argument? I mean, you're writing a book called Arguments, Logic for the Left. So the idea, I think it would be a presupposition of argumentation that we would probably prefer to talk these things out than just club each other over the head and see who wins, right?
Yes. Clubbing each other over the head is bad. I do think that it's a little misleading to present libertarian property rights claims as a matter of nonviolence, but maybe we could put a pin in that.
Okay, but just to say, so we prefer this. So if somebody is existing in their body as we are, it would stand reasonable, since we prefer peace to violence, peace to conflict, that probably they should be in charge of what they do with their body. Now, I'm not saying they can't do some things in desperate situations that we would all think is like really sad and horrible, but more or less that you're in control, and we recognize, at least with some degree of agency, that you make some degree of the decisions about what you're doing with your body. So if somebody goes, forget the theft analogy before. If I walk down the street and I just beat the shit out of somebody, almost kill them. It's a very small person. I'm not a very tough guy. But let's say a real tiny guy, I just really wail on him, start beating him up. I think you would agree, and I would both agree, that I've committed a crime and I should be held accountable for that. Whatever the system is, whether we believe in prison or excommunication, but there's something. So we both recognize that I now kind of, in a sense, not in a literal property sense, own my actions. That because I did something, I have a claim on that kind of, that I'm responsible for. So that, to me, is the essence of where you can draw a line from self-ownership, or whatever you want to call it, self-autonomy, to having some responsibility for what you do. Now, if you have some responsibility for what you do, shouldn't you also if I have to own committing a crime, shouldn't I also own something that I did with my time? Does that make sense?
Well, I think I see what your line of thought is. I think there's a little bit of an equivocation there, about owning in the sense that you're morally responsible for it, and owning in the sense that you should be allowed to to keep something, right? I mean, like, those are just two different senses of the word own, right?
Okay.
So I'm not necessarily seeing the connection there. I also think that, I wouldn't just say in the indentured servitude case that's really sad that they had to agree to that. I'd say that we live, and this is where earlier you accused me of blurring the lines, and I accused you of having an implausibly threadbare conception of what it means to be voluntary, right? I think we live in a freer society overall, right? If that kind of contract is not allowed. I think that freedom is best understood, and this is where I know, in your, in the debunk of the debunk that we're now debunking in the debunkotude, they have that you said that you said, okay, well, sure, maybe there's like some sense of freedom that's like best understood in terms of having options, like saying that, if you're in a plane, you're free from the ground, right? But I think it's much more direct than that. I think in the core sense of freedom from domination, from coercion, I think that your overall amount of freedom is greater if you can't be pressured into certain kinds of contracts to accept certain kinds of extreme domination because there's an enforced floor.
Yes, but don't you see the irony in your position that you're arguing for a state? Like the sentence that you just said, you think it's better if you can't be forced into some sense of domination, yet you're funding the state that is throwing people in cages for defaulting on a bill. Essentially, you're charging someone a fee for being productive and then throwing them in a cage for one of these rape dungeons that we discussed earlier for being late on a bill. It's a debtor's prison. It's a debtor's prison run by the state that you support. And at the same time, you're objecting to my point because of this highly unlikely scenario where someone's having a really hard time and choose to do something that is like, I agree with you. That's terrible.
It's not at all implausible. It's there's a reason why real history.
Yeah, but the one I'm talking about is happening.
Why real history is full of it, right?
The history is also full. The greatest crimes throughout history have been committed by states. And you know this. I mean, to talk about real examples from history where voluntary agreements have gone bad, I'm not saying you can't find any. How about real examples from history of state authoritarianism? Look at the 20th century. There 250 million people were murdered by their own governments. So, I mean, yeah, funding a government, I think, could also lead to some really bad scenarios. Like, we can both paint these scenarios. I have a long list of historical examples of where a state's taxing ability and right to initiate violence on peaceful people has gone pretty bad.
Okay, so there, you're throwing a lot at me at the same time here. I do want to put a pin again in right to initiate violence against peaceful people. I think that's actually an incredibly misleading way of framing this, and we can get into why. But to get back to your original point, I think about prisons, a few interconnected points about that. One, if we're concerned, as we both agreed, that we were about the fact that, American prisons are rape dungeons and shouldn't be, right? I think a really good model to look at for what a more reasonable system would be, say, Norway, one of the countries in the world with the smallest imprisonment rate. I don't think it's a coincidence that Norway has both one of the lowest imprisonment rates in the world and one of the most generous redistributive, systems in the world economically.
But correlation does not equal causation. So it's possible that they're connected.
Correlation does not equal causation, but I think that if you ever read the webcomic XKCD, they have a nice line in there about how correlation is not causation, but does wag its eyebrows suggestively at it. Right?
I think that's fair. I think that's absolutely fair. It also could be because it's a largely peaceful country in general. Like, that could have something to do with it too.
I mean, it's certainly nothing. They're certainly not like genetically peaceful. These these are the descendants of Vikings. They had like.
No, I wasn't arguing it's genetics.
Okay, but I'm saying like this. That's not like I think that the peacefulness of the social democracy go hand in hand. But I also think that framing it in terms of who's going to be thrown in jail, whatever those jails look like, we certainly agree that if they're going to be jails, they shouldn't look like they look right now. But that in terms of framing in jail, it is kind of a red herring because, look, according to you, right, there are property claims that should be enforced with whatever level of force it takes. You agreed earlier that might include jails. You
for violent criminals, it's possible.
Okay. You expressed some, but not for theft, not for,
It depends on what kind of theft you're talking about. Theft can be a very violent crime.
Okay.
It depends.
But
certainly not a peaceful crime.
Okay. So, but theft that didn't involve any physical harm to people, you'd never support jail for that.
Personally, no, I would not. I would not support jail. For that. So, like shoplifting, going to jail, no. I'd say I think if we're not living in a barbaric civilization, we can come up with some type of there should be some consequence for it. But no, I don't think you should be sent to a cage for shoplifting.
Yeah, I mean, shoplifting, I probably agree with you. I mean, I think that we can. I think
breaking into somene's house when their family is there, or something like that, or that's a very different crime.
How about if you're like Grand Theft Auto, right? It's like if not the game, but the crime.
Banging hookers and murdering people? What are we talking about here?
Yeah. But the actual crime, right?
That's all I did. I never finished one level of that goddamn game. You just get lost killing people, am I right? You get like one done and then killing people. By the way, just a heads up that we have in about 8 minutes, we got to wrap. But anyway, I'm sorry. So Grand Theft Auto, the crime Grand Theft Auto, not the game.
Okay. Since we do have 8 minutes left, I don't want to get too lost in the weeds about like exactly which crimes, might merit some sort of jail time, which shouldn't, especially because I actually think that this is something where our impulses are very similar. And, I think that I'm not optimistic that we could have a society where there was no form of involuntary confinement for, punishment for any crimes. But I certainly think that anything even vaguely resembling the prison system that we've got, we shouldn't have. I think there's actually a lot of agreement about that.
Do you think people should go to jail for not paying their taxes?
I think that there should be. I think that there should be some form of punishment, whether that actually involves jail time, or like there's a lot.
But you can't just say.
There's a lot.
But it's not simple enough to just say no. You shouldn't be thrown in a cage for a debt that's unpaid. Like that you can't just give me a no on that. Forget, even if it's a nicer cage where people aren't being raped, that your freedom shouldn't be taken away, thrown in a cage like an animal. I mean, no matter the nicest prison in the world, it's still like robbing someone of their bodily autonomy, if you want to call it that.
Okay, but like you said an interesting thing there, right? You said for like an unpaid debt, right? So when you think it's a legitimate debt, right? The person like actually does owe the money, right? What's the what is the thing that you think that should be done if they refuse to pay the debt that they owe?
They should, I guess, be sued. They should owe the money.
Okay.
What's the punishment that should be?
But if the lawsuit goes against them and the judge rules,
I don't believe in debtor's prison. If that's what you're asking.
Okay, but here's the larger point, right? Because I think that like on a lot of this stuff, right? Like what exactly should be the punishments, be for various crimes? My instincts are very anti-retributive. I think that like if we can effectively enforce things with lesser forms of punishment, we absolutely should. That like probably a just society, like 0.01% of the people that we imprison right now would be imprisoned. So if there's a better way to enforce it, I'm all for that, right? Here's the larger point, that I think where we disagree is not really about whether enforcement should be through jail or wage garnishment or, halfway house or, whatever form of creative, lesser punishment that you come up from. What we really disagree is about what should be punished in the first place. What is a category of thing that you shouldn't be allowed to do, whether the not allowing is being enforced by the state or by, the ANCAP militia in Rothbardistan or whoever's enforcing it, right? And this is why I think that it's really misleading to present the difference between support for redistribution and opposition to it as a matter of peace and violence. Because when you say, and by the way, I know on your thing, on your previous episode about me, you'd played a clip of me saying that, oh yeah, we should totally do one of these about the non-aggression principle sometime. We don't have time to do it right now.
I'd love to do another one and do that.
Okay, well, absolutely. But also while you're waiting for it,
sure.
there should be one that's I think we did it last night on the show. I think it should be coming out on YouTube in the next couple days. But just to do a super condensed version of that, because I don't have that much time. The non-aggression principle sounds like you're saying, right? We shouldn't initiate violence, except in self-defense. And if that's what you're actually saying, like, oh, don't initiate physical harm or the threat of physical harm against another person,
don't hit people and don't take their stuff.
Okay, but that's the key move, right? Because it's not don't hit people and don't take their stuff. It's not don't hit people. It's don't hit people and take their stuff, because it's made to sound like this quasi-pacifist position that like, oh, what we're really objecting.
No, that's not. It's not a pacifist position.
Yeah, that's why I said quasi-pacifist.
But it's not. But nobody's claiming it's pacifist.
Okay, but you are talking a lot about violence, and so the implication is that the difference between people who accept this and people who don't accept this is how much violence they're okay with. And hold on, but let me just correct you right there, because you're setting up a straw man. Okay.
I'm not. My position is not anything to do with whether I'm okay with violence. It's being against aggression. It's the non-aggression principle. If somebody came and tried to stab my wife or daughter, I will fucking kill them if that means saving them, and I have absolutely no problem with that. I'm not against violence per se. I'm against aggressing against people, right? So that's it's not the non-violent principle. It's the non-aggression principle.
Yeah.
Okay.
No,
so
I understand.
Okay. So maybe I misunderstood what you're saying.
That's why I said.
So maybe I misunderstood.
That's why I said quasi. That that like in other words, if it was really just a principle about initiating violence, then that would actually be incompatible with the existence of any form of property. Because to make a property claim meaningfully is to implicitly threaten, no matter how reasonable, proportionate, et cetera, but it's to threaten some kind of force that you're saying, I will enforce this claim. That's what a no trespassing sign is.
No trespassing. Trespassers will be shot. Would be a threat of violence. No trespassing is kind of vague. Having property isn't inherently a threat of violence, but owning property gives one the moral right to defend their property.
Okay,
I'll agree with you on that.
Okay, I would say that if that no trespassing sign means anything at all, right? if it's not just like, the please smile sign, right? Like, okay, if, there's a sign that says please smile, that doesn't mean that somebody's going to call the cops if you don't, right? They have but if it means anything at all, there's some kind of threat of that, some sort of force if it's violated. And so we could talk about how to enforce that, but that's a very separate discussion. And I think it's a red herring, because I think the real disagreement isn't about, how to enforce whatever sorts of claims of who's entitled to what we're making. It's the underlying issue of who's entitled to what. And just real quick, they have and so the standard libertarian theory that you get from Nozick or from Rothbard is that it doesn't matter for who's morally entitled to what, how many people, like how unequal the resulting distribution is, like what the lives of people who are born poor versus the lives of people who are born rich are like, all that stuff. It's not fine. I understand their distinction there, right? But, as far as who's entitled to what, right, that's fine, as long as it comes about in the right way. Right, that it comes about through a combination of just acts of original acquisition, and then you're not violating this afterwards. And I think two things about that. One, I think that I just fundamentally disagree with that theory of entitlement. I think that actually the Rawlsian stuff does much better capture most people's moral feelings about about who's entitled to what. And two, even if we did agree with that, still massive redistribution would be justified, because the real economic history of the world, as you well know, right? You were just talking about state authoritarianism and its death count and all of that stuff. The real economic history of the world is absolutely nothing like this Nozickian Rothbardian fairy tale. That the real economic history of the world, even in Europe, capitalism emerged from feudalism through this wildly involuntary, system of enclosures, all that stuff.
Sure.
And compared to here in the New World, that was like cozy and consensual.
Oh, I mean, look,
right?
if you want to say anything, look, I'm agreeing with you on that point. If you want to say anything, anything before a couple hundred years ago, the amount of stuff that was attained through voluntary trade versus the amount of land property that was attained through conquest, it's probably 99 to 1, and it might be even more than that. So I agree with that. But hold on, let me just respond.
I would understand somebody's position if they said, I think that whatever distribution we end up with is fine as long as it can be traced back to these just acts of original acquisition. And because most of it can't be, I actually don't support those property claims. I support redistribution. I understand that. And I understand somebody saying, okay, redistribution, for example, reparations for slavery, etc. That would be, that would cause too many problems to try to do that. So we shouldn't do that. It's going to be better overall, if we don't try to correct that. I don't understand how you can do both at once.
Okay, well, let me address a couple of things that you just said there. So number one, in terms of Rothbard in saying that, well, in terms of real history or real, history of economics, it was never this Rothbardian fairy tale. Well, Murray Rothbard wrote quite a bit about history, particularly the history of economics, and the whole central theme of his work was that it hasn't been this way and that this is wrong. Also, I don't think most libertarians would say if you can. See, we don't believe really in collective justice. That we believe in justice of individual case. So if you can trace something back and be like, this was stolen from me, I'm fine with that. I was fine with Jews who reclaimed their possessions after the Nazis fell. The contradiction. Hold on. Let me finish my
for
point.
The descendants of slaves?
It depends who you're taking them from. If you could take them from the slave owners, then sure. If you can demonstrate in that case, if you're just taxing somebody who just moved here from some other country a few years ago, if you're taxing people whose family fought for the North in the Civil War, then no. Then you here the same principle. Hold on, let me just finish my point. You talked for quite a bit. The same principle that you're saying it was wrong to take it from them. So no, two wrongs are not going to make a right. If you're just robbing from other people, then no, that wouldn't be a system of justice in my mind at all. Now, on top of that, the non-aggression principle, and look, maybe we'll have to do this again, and we'll get into this more because we got a hard out, and there's so much here, and I really have enjoyed this conversation. But I would say this, that the non-aggression principle is not just a principle that people have. It is such a central principle to any type of civilization. You can object to it all you want to. You live by the non-aggression principle. I do too. We're living by it right now. You're not taking anybody's stuff. Forget my example, whether you would say it was theft or not. I know you're not going down on the street and robbing anybody's wallet. We live, if you go to a playground with your, with my daughter's only 4 months old now, but maybe in a couple years, we go to a playground and we brought like 4 toys with us, and another kid comes and doesn't have, any toys. They didn't bring anything with them. There's no doubt in my mind that the right thing to do in that scenario would be like, oh, we're going to share some of our toys with this other kid. Like, oh, hey, do you want to play with this one? Because she's not playing with this. But if that kid comes over and punches my daughter and takes them, that's going to be a problem. The non-aggression principle is a central principle in so much of how we live in civilization. And so, again, I don't completely agree with your idea or Rawls' idea, or your idea of a just distribution. I think there are cases where it might be better if things were distributed a different way, but the means of how you get those things matter. And anyway, the basic idea of not hitting people and not taking their stuff, it's hard for me to not, even somebody like you who might be a socialist or democratic socialist, I think you would have to acknowledge, even in your life, that principle runs throughout your existence.
Well, I don't know. I have as a certain percentage of your fan base, reminds me on Twitter. I'm happily living off of the income that I'm paid at a public university.
Yeah, but you're not taking it.
Okay, but I have, and in the past, right? I've paid taxes that go to support. The agencies,
Me too. I just got banged out this year, man. Jesus.
That take it. I've violated, I have enthusiastically, voted for politicians, who will increase, top marginal tax rates. So I guess, maybe I haven't.
Well, you support other people who have violated the non-aggression principle.
Okay.
You've taken the fruit of other people violating the non-aggression principle, but you yourself are not really out there doing that in your life. Yeah. Am I wrong?
Am I out there personally enforcing taxation? No, I pay other people to do that.
But I'm not saying like whether you don't exactly choose to pay them. You pay them whatever they tell you to. Listen, all right, we are at a hard out, but I do want to say I really, really appreciate you coming in. I'd love to do this again sometime. I thought this was a really interesting conversation. Absolutely. We may disagree on a lot, but you've won my respect, and I'd highly recommend people go check out the book. Give them an argument. Logic for the Left. It's available for pre-order on Amazon now, and then I assume it'll be out
end of May.
End of May. Okay. All right. Sounds good. Ben, thank you so much for coming in. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Dave.
All right. Thanks, guys, for listening. I hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back on Friday with a brand new episode. Goodbye.